Hey, it's Tom from Tom's Toons. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to install the Underdeck LED kit from PontoonStuff.com. Under deck lighting, under body lighting, accent ambiance lighting, all of those apply. Let's dig into what comes in the package and show you how to install it.
Which one of you is going to do the under deck lights video? Which one?
They're both saying they're too tired. It looks like I'm gonna have to.
Were you just looking for your phone?
No, I was looking for my knife.
No.
Which is...
Oh! It's right here. I was using it.
Whoa! Girl never puts a lid on a jar, and she never puts the blade away on the razor.
Those are his two favorite things about me.
This is the shorter of the two options. You can order a longer kit, but this is only about a 19.5 foot deck on this boat. So this kit is going to be plenty long. It comes in this long skinny box. We're going to open it all the way up and show you what all is inside. If you order a kit that's too long, not the end of the world. There will be ways that you can tie it and wrap it, and you can cut these. Otherwise, sometimes we just wrap them under the front of the boat and they give a little beam shooting out too. So in this box, we've got 3M adhesive strips. Those are going to hold the light strips in place if you use these. We'll show you how to use those, and we'll show you the alternative if those don't quite work on your boat. We have two matching light strip kits. They're on a spool. And these typically, we're just going to go ahead and unwrap and open up as long as you don't have a crazy dog around that's going to try to eat them. No, it's not food. It doesn't even smell like food. And then you've got your wiring kit that's going to have two spools of wire, basically, two bundles, and some connectors, some heat shrink tubing. We'll show you how that works as well. To get started, I'm going to tie this dog up so she can't attack the LED lights that we're going to put on the boat.
She is also your boss.
No, River's the boss. I'm going to start by unrolling these. And I'm just going to lay my LED strips on the floor alongside the boat so I can get an idea of how much strip lights I have to start with. What this is an encased LED strip. So the strip is on the inside. There are little copper... Guys, our light is on a timer and it expires sometimes, and it's always at the very worst moment. These LED light strips are encased in a plastic rubbery sort of material. It's going to really protect them. And if you look inside, you've got your LEDs and you've got little copper places where you can cut them. If you need to cut them, I usually try to tape or heat shrink the ends if I need to cut them. But those are your strips. In the past, I have installed some cheaper alternatives, like from Amazon, on boats. Sometimes they want to have the controller for the color. That's fine. They didn't work great. They didn't last as long. I've installed these on dozens of boats now, and these are the same type of LEDs that go under the seats, and I have had zero issues in the last few years of installing these on customers' boats. I'm going to strand this out, run it the length of the boat so we can see how much we have to work with. And in this case, we're going to end up really close to being perfectly front to back. The reason I'm going to run the electrical connections to the back is so that if I have excess of the LED strip, I can just tie it around the front a little bit. It's a lot easier to tie up there than under the back. I'm going to do the same thing with this spool on the starboard side of the boat. Our options for installing the lights to the deck or to your rub rails, there's a couple different ways we can go about it. For using the LED light strips, that strip will push right into this and it stays in there, it's not coming out. You can peel and stick the back of this and we could work them along the length of the boat. The one time that I use these without even thinking about it is if you have a significant lip on the bottom of your deck trim. So in this case, I've only got about 1/8 of an inch of a lip. There's a bend over here, or in the extrusion, we've got this little lip. If you have 1/4 of an inch or so, you can absolutely clean it really well, and then you can peel and stick it in there. But as you can see, in this case, I really don't have room to do that, especially with My cross members is another thing that factors in. These cross members are running right to the deck trim. They're a full width cross member, so it's not going to leave room in here. So this is going to be a unique situation. I could potentially span them across these brackets, but I really don't like to if they're this style where there's gaps. If you look at the boat next to us, that has a full skirting as bracket, and if you needed to, you could stick these to that, or you could run self-tapping screws way up high and install them there. In this case, we're not going to be using these strip holders here. What we're going to have to do is run through each of these cross members just on the very outside part, and I'm going to drill a 1/2-inch hole through the end of it, near the end, that I can run my LED strips through. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and in between each hole I'll use a wire clip or wire tie with a 3/4 inch or a 1/2 inch stainless screw, and we'll tie it up to the deck on the bottom side in between each of the cross members. Lucky for me, they're on 24-inch centers, so not a ton to go through, but I'm going to go ahead, run my holes through those, run my LEDs through the holes, and then we'll get to tying them up to the deck. This can be a little bit tedious, but it's worth it in the long run because I know they're going to be stuck on here and tied up really well forever. So I'm going to pilot just with a 1/4 inch bit all of these all the way down. Then I can go back through with my 1/2 inch and it'll run through a lot cleaner and a lot faster. I don't need to worry about the front one because I'm going to tie it to the deck up here, but I'm just going to work back through all of these channels all the way to the stern on both sides. Take it up pretty high. Try to stay consistent the whole way. Got my pilot hole. I'll run the 1/2 inch through that same hole all the way down. I got all of my holes drilled. I ended up actually just using a 1/2 inch at the biggest setting step bit, and that gave me a nice clean hole. Made sure there were no big burrs or anything to catch on or to end up cutting or damaging my LED strip. I took the power and ground lead, I taped them together, and I'm just running it through all the holes. Start at the very front, running it through all those holes I just drilled. And then what I'll do, I can do my best to try to make sure it's oriented with the LEDs facing down. But I'm just gonna keep pulling it through gently. Every few cross members I'll pull a little extra slack. That helps make sure it doesn't get caught or pinched. When I go through in a minute here, I'll make sure that my LEDs are pointed down when I tie it up to the deck in between all of the cross members. But for now, I'm gonna run this on both sides. Then we'll get to tying it up with those wire clips, and then we can get to electrical. I've got my rope lights, LEDs run through all my cross members. So now it's just a process I'm gonna work through, and I'm using 2 different sizes of these wire clips. And actually on the bag, I order these in bulk, actually off of Amazon. They come with a stainless steel screw, a little 3/4 inch or just under, and then it's a clip. It's a wire clip. They call it a rope light cable clip. So this is a 3/8 inch, and this works really well for the middle of the run. I use a smaller one, a 1/4 inch, to pin my start and stop point in the front and the back of the boat. So if you come look here, I have a much smaller clip up here, and that's going to prevent the rope light from being able to move at all forward to back. So that pins it in place. My wiring will run in a minute, but that will eventually make its way through and up to the console. So I want to pin that. I'll tie my wires for power and ground. I'll tie that up to the deck too. I got to work around my steering cable here, but I'm going to go ahead with these 3/8 inch now, and I'm just going to run one in between each of the cross members. If you're using those adhesive strips against your deck trim here, all you're going to do is peel and stick the adhesive strip, and then instead of having to run all this through, if you've got space between your cross members and your deck trim, you're going to be able to just stick this LED strip right into that trim, you know, maybe leave 6 inches or so between each of those strips. They're just gonna stick right in there, and then you jump right to wiring. This is extra work, It's how it goes sometimes. Every boat's different. But this is the most secure way for me to do it on this boat where the cross members meet the deck trim and I have no room to run something between. So I'm gonna make sure that my light is aimed downward. We're gonna keep it the same orientation the whole way. I'm using a long Phillips head bit here. And then we're just gonna run it up. And that way there's some play there. Not a lot, but it's gonna keep it oriented, aiming down. Now I'll just keep running the same thing all the way to the front of the boat. And when we get there, I'll show you how I wrap in the front just a little bit. But I have to do this on both sides. And we'll get up to the front and tie that up, then we can jump to wiring. We tied up this port side and I just bring it and it just loops in front. And then I use that 1/4" clip on the end. That's held in place. I just try to orient it facing down the best I can. It's gonna glow nicely. We're ready for wiring everything in. So let's go look at that bundle of wires again. So you've got that bundle of wires. One's gonna be a little bit beefier than the other. So this is gonna be for that port side because it's gonna go from the console all the way to the back and then cut across the port. That shorter one, smaller bundle is gonna be for the starboard side because it just has to come from the console back to our wires. So we're gonna have a lot of extra wires. That's totally fine. Just cut off what you don't use. You might be able to use it for something else, but this is 16 gauge. What you end up having here, if you look at the way that this works, these two connections split. And one are ground wires. So there's a black stripe on this. It's mostly black wire. It's got a little bit of the blue from pulling apart. And then you have an all blue wire. So what we have is an all blue wire is going to be positive. That one that's black or with black with a little bit of blue is your ground. Those are going to go to the console. So what I'm going to do is go to the back of the boat on the starboard side and I'm going to run these up first up to my console. And I didn't mention, but on each bundle at the end you have a positive, a solid blue, and then a negative that's got the black in it. So on each set of lights, starboard and port, there's a positive and a ground or positive and negative right there to tie in. It's just at the helm, and we'll explain that when we hook to the switch panel, that these are gonna tie in, they come together to go onto one switch. Got the twisty tie off of each of them, but I'm gonna keep them separate and I'm gonna fish my port side. I'm gonna go ahead, send that across, and then I can keep my starboard side here and I'm gonna run my connections for the switch up to the console. Pick a spot where you can cut across the back of the boat. If you wired it in the front, that's fine too, but I can go straight across here over the transom and then tie into that port stern light. And I'm just gonna leave these, I can send them back here, and then I'm gonna just take these connections and run them forward, and then I'll chase them up through to the console. And it's really not a bad idea as you're pulling these wires up to run a piece of electrical tape, you know, every foot or so, just to keep them together so that other wires can't get entangled with them. Makes it easier if you ever have to trace these down to have them bundled together and not all intertwined, tangled with everything else. And once I get my connections for the switch up to the console, I'll run across and run my port wires over to that LED. And at that point, I'll have a pretty good idea of where my wires are gonna hang, if I need to add some slack, and how much I can cut off. Then we'll splice them into the LED strips. I've set my wires up from underneath, and I'm just gonna keep them as clean as possible. Got that connection here, and I'm gonna feed this out to where my switch panels are gonna be. I'm gonna leave these hanging right here in the cutout, and I'll get to my switch panel in just a minute. These are my under seat LEDs ready to tie in as well. But I'm gonna leave these hang here just for now. That way I can go under, take out the slack. I've got this crimped over here. It can't get pulled back through. We'll take out the slack and then we'll cut off the excess wires, and we're gonna use a heat shrink butt splice to connect into those LEDs. So like I mentioned, I'm gonna be using these heat shrink butt splices. We're doing this as a permanent connection, permanent mount of lights. It does come with some connectors that are more of a quick connect style, and some heat shrink tubing, I guess, in case you would ever want to make them removable or tie in other lighting to it. You'd have some options, but you could always cut the butt splices out if you needed to anyway. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull my wires over to the port side, get those where I want them, and we're going to get any slack out that is there so we can splice things in nice and clean. And then I'll use those wire clips, same type of clip, usually a 1/4 inch, to tie my extra wire that runs across to the port. I'll tie that up to the deck as it cuts across so it's out of the way and clean so nothing can catch on it or snag. So I'm back here on my starboard side, and I've got my wire coming back from the dash. I've got the slack pulled out of it, and then I've got my wire, and I did add another wire clip or two up on the deck here. So what I'm going to do is just do my best to not leave too much slack, but I don't want to pull things so tight it's impossible for me to splice things together. So I'm going to just overlap them a little bit here, and then I can make a cut on each wire, and that'll leave me room underneath here to still work and splice them back together. So I've got them pinched where they overlapped, and I like the amount of tension, the amount of slack in there. So that's what I'm going to go with. So I just keep a finger on each of them where they overlapped, and I can cut them each, maybe give myself a little bit of wiggle room, add an inch or so to each wire. But if you can see this here, I've still got a good amount of overlap. Still got a good amount of overlap on those wires. So not worried about it. Now I'm gonna go ahead, I've got enough room, I can pull them out of there just a little bit to work on them. I'm gonna splice in, start with that side coming from the console. I'm just gonna peel back the sheathing with my wire strippers, and then I'm gonna go ahead and put on my heat shrink butt splice. You get those crimped on, and if you're using the connectors from the kit, you would just put on a bullet connector on one side, the male side, the female on the other, and connect them. Now I've got my LED wires, and I cut those back too. I've got a red and a black. My red is my positive, my black is my ground. The way those will correspond into my wires coming from the panel. I've got my wire that's got black on it. That's going to go to the all black wire of the LED. So I'm going to go ahead, splice those in together. And then the red is going to go to the solid blue wire, my positive. I'll go ahead and just hit this with my lighter. I keep it in the blue part of the flame. Usually keeps it from charring, and we'll just shrink these up. And then I'm going to go ahead and jump over to that port side, and I'm going to repeat the process. This exact same thing. The wires are the same on both sides. I've got a red coming from the LED, black from the ground, and then from my harness coming from the switch panel or my console, that's going to be the solid blue for positive and the black stripe for my ground. The starboard side is done. Luckily, I've got a steering cable here, some other wires that I can tie that into to make sure it's nice and tidy. Let's go to the port side, repeat this same process, and then I'll meet you up at the console, and we're going to talk about hooking it to the switch panel, and then we'll test these things out. On this console, this is the standard console. We've got a burlwood switch panel. Cool thing with the switch panel, it's customizable, so you can put the switches on however you want them. And before I hook the battery up or anything, I'm going to go ahead and wire in my positive and my ground. So we have our positive solid blue wires, ground wires, they come together, those have the black stripe on them. And I'm going to wire that into the switch panel. So what I've done is I have basically my horn, navigation lights, docking lights, interior LEDs, both courtesy lights, and then accessory is going to be my exterior lights. So that's going to be this switch here. When I flip it over, we're looking at this switch. What I need to do in order to go onto this switch, I have a positive coming from my breaker. I'm going to hook on to this male spade terminal. You look right here. That's the power out for the switch. So I'm going to take that solid blue wire. Don't worry about the piggyback part of this splice. You could pinch that down if you want. You could cut it off, but you don't need to. And we're going to insert that onto that male spade terminal. If you were installing a ground bus bar, you could install your ground to that. But on these switch panels, we have grounds and positives and breakers all ready to go. So what I'm gonna do on the same switch is I'm gonna pull this ground wire off of the post. Gotta wiggle it off of there. And I like to just pinch this back down just a little bit to close it back up for when I reinstall it. And I'm gonna use the piggyback on my ground wires coming from the LEDs. And I'm just gonna install that ground that I just unplugged, that solid black wire, onto this piggyback male spade terminal. I slide those together, and what I like to do is either take a small zip tie or some electrical tape and wrap this so they can't come apart. Before I plug it back onto the switch, I'm just gonna wrap that nice and tight with some electrical tape. And then going onto the same switch as my positive, I'm gonna install that ground. Now my LEDs are gonna have positive from the switch and a ground tied into the switch panel and the grounds associated. To test this, I'm gonna plug in my switch panel to the accessory harness from PontoonStuff.com. With our harness plugged in, we look on the sides of the boat. We've got our LEDs front to back on each side. Oh, yeah, it's pretty darn sharp if you ask me. What do you think?
I think it'd be cooler if the lights were off.
Let me go hit the lights.
That's the light, man.
Glowing bright. I can see the whole back of the shop glowing from the front. Whether you're doing a whole restoration like this, or you just want to add this LED kit to a newer boat, an older boat, maybe this is the only lights you have on your boat. If you want to add it, you can use Tom's Tunes at checkout at PontoonStuff.com. Saves you 5%, helps our channel. Hope this video was helpful with you installing your kit from PontoonStuff.com. Thanks for watching.